The rain over the skeletal remains of the Seattle Metroplex didn't fall. It seeped from a sky the color of a day-old bruise. Kyle moved through the canyons of dead skyscrapers, a ghost in a graveyard of giants. His breath plumed in the cold air, smelling of recycled oxygen and the faint, metallic tang of decay that clung to everything since the Ethel had come. Above, the city's corpse was pierced by a single, impossibly thin spire that scraped the perpetual gray overcast a silence tower, humming a tune that only the soul could hear. It was a frequency of null, a psychic anesthetic designed to quell the very thing the Ethel had come to excise from the galaxy, the messy, violent, beautiful chaos of strong emotion. They called themselves curators, arriving and not with the fire of conquerors, but with the chilling precision of surgeons excising a tumor. Humanity, with its history of incandescent rage and profound sorrow, was the most virulent cancer they had ever encountered. Kyle was a reclaimer, one of the few who still crawled through the guts of the dead world. He wasn't a soldier, not anymore. The hollow men, the scattered remnants of Earth's resistance, still fought their pointless shadow war. But Kale had traded his rifle for a cutting torch and a multi-band scanner. He hunted for ghosts of a different sort lost technology, dormant data caches, anything that could be traded for nutrient paste, water filters, or the fleeting bliss of pre-war synthetic whiskey. Today, however, he wasn't hunting for sustenance. He was hunting for a memory. He moved with the quiet economy of a predator, his worn fatigues blending with the moss-eaten concrete. His target was the old Seraphim Dynamics building, its glass skin long since shattered, leaving a jagged ribcage open to the elements. Intel from a whisper network said its sub-level archives were shielded, one of the few places that might have survived the Ethel's initial data purge. He sought a specific server bank, one that held personnel files, medical records. He needed to see a name, a face, to prove to himself that the hole in his own memory wasn't just a figment of his grief. The Silence Tower's hum was a physical pressure in his skull, a constant reminder to feel nothing, to remember nothing of consequence, to exist as a placid, manageable component of the new order. Most survivors succumb to it, living in the designated quiet zones with the vacant eyes of tranquilized animals. But for reclaimers, the hum was the enemy. It dulled the instincts, blurred the focus. Kale fought it with a litany of his own, a string of names whispered under his breath, a rosary of the dead that kept the fire in his gut from turning to ash. He slipped through a fissure in the Seraphim building's foundation, his headlamp cutting a nervous swath through the oppressive dark. The air was thick with the scent of whetstone and something else, something sharp and electric, like ozone. Ethel patrols were rare this deep in the exclusion zone, their automated Spectre drones sticking to the main thoroughfares. But caution was a religion for reclaimers. He found the archive door, a slab of reinforced steel that had been partially melted. Something had tried to get in, or out, with extreme prejudice. He bypassed the maglock with a practiced touch, the faint click echoing in the tomb-like silence. The server room was a chaotic mess of torn cables and shattered casings, but one central monolith remained intact, its surface strangely free of dust. As he interfaced his wrist comp, the expected stream of encrypted data didn't appear. Instead, a low thrum vibrated through the floor, a counter-frequency to the Ethel's psychic blanket. The monolith wasn't a server, it was a containment unit, and something inside wanted out. Kale recoiled, his hand flying to the pulse pistol at his hip. This was wrong. This was deep-level tech, the kind of project that governments buried before the war because they were too afraid of what they'd made. The humming intensified, and it wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling. A wave of profound sorrow washed over him, so potent it brought tears to his eyes, the collective grief of 1 billion souls snuffed out in an instant. Then came the rage, white-hot and pure, the defiance of a world that refused to kneel. He saw flashes behind his eyes, a soldier holding a barricade against a silver tide, a mother shielding her child from a plasma blast, a scientist keying a self-destruct sequence, smiling through the blood. These weren't his memories, but he felt them as if they were. This was the resonance, the ghost fever that old scavengers whispered about. It was the psychic echo of humanity's violent death, imprinted on the very fabric of its most advanced creations. It was the force that had supposedly driven his old mentor, Silas, into the depths of the ruins, transforming him from a man into a terrifying legend. The containment field on the monolith flickered and died. A single panel slid open, revealing not a weapon, but a simple, unadorned data slate. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, and the hum was now a clear, resonant note that seemed to vibrate in Coil's own bones. He knew he should leave it, run, and never look back. This was the kind of discovery that got you erased, not just by the ethel, but by the very universe itself. But the feelings it projected, they were an antidote to the tower's null song. It was the first time in years he had felt anything other than the dull ache of survival. He took the slate. The moment his glove touched its surface, the world snapped into sharp, painful focus. The Silence Tower's hum became a grating shriek, a clumsy, brutish instrument trying to drown out a symphony. He could feel the city around him, not as a collection of buildings, but as a web of echoes. He could feel the Spectre drones 2 blocks away, their machine minds cold and empty. And he could feel something else, something silver and silent, moving through the rain-slicked streets above. Its attention suddenly diverted. The ethel curators were coming. They didn't walk. They flowed, their seamless silver armor rippling like mercury, their movements devoid of any wasted energy. They weren't drawn by a sound or a signal his gear was shielded. They were drawn by him, by the sudden, incandescent spike of feeling he was now broadcasting. He scrambled out of the archives, the slate tucked inside his jacket, its thrum a frantic heartbeat against his ribs. He had to get back to the Undercroft, the repurposed subway station that served as his sanctuary. He had to find Hilara. She was a tech shaman, a woman who understood the resonance not as science, but as spirit, the angry ghosts of a murdered world. She had warned him about seeking things that held too much of the past. Some echoes are so loud, they deafen you to the present, she'd said. They make you forget you're still a man, and not just another ghost. As he ran, the city's past bled into his vision. The gray ruins were overlaid with the shimmering phantoms of what they once were bustling crowds. Holographic advertisements, the smell of street food, the laughter of children. The slate wasn't just a beacon, it was a key, unlocking the layers of trauma baked into the concrete and steel. He felt the fear of those who died in these streets, the grim determination of those who fought. His own grief, the one he had come here to exhume, was now just a single voice in a choir of billions. He reached the entrance to the Undercroft, a collapsed section of an old freeway that hid the station's blast doors. Just as the first curator descended from a rooftop, it landed without a sound, a 7-foot-tall sculpture of fluid metal, its featureless faceplate reflecting the gray sky. It held a long, crystalline staff that pulsed with a null energy field. It wasn't a weapon of destruction, but of erasure. It didn't kill you, it unmade you, stripping away memory and consciousness until nothing but a placid, empty shell remained. Kale slid through the closing blast doors just as the curator's staff discharged a wave of silent energy that turned the concrete outside smooth and featureless, like sea-worn glass. Inside, Ilara was waiting, her face etched with worry. She was an old woman, her skin a roadmap of hardships, her eyes sharp and knowing. She saw the slate in his hand immediately, saw the change in his posture, the dangerous light in his eyes. "You foolish boy," she breathed, her voice raspy. "You've brought a firestorm down on us." Before he could answer, the entire station shuddered. A deep, resonant boom echoed from the surface. They were breaching the doors. "They are not here for the station," Kale said, his own voice sounding distant, layered with the echoes in his head. "They're here for this." He held up the slate. "They're here to silence it." Ilara grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "It's too late for that. It has already tuned to you. Kyle, it's using you as its amplifier. We have to ground it, sever the connection before it consumes you." She dragged him toward the heart of the Undercroft, a chamber built around a massive, pre-war geothermal tap. Wires and conduits snaked from the tap to a ring of salvage tech, a desperate attempt to create a grounding field, a psychic lightning rod. As she began the frantic sequence, Kale could feel the ethel cutting through the levels above, their progress methodical, silent, and terrifyingly fast. The slate in his jacket grew warmer, the hum rising in pitch. The memories it fed him were no longer just flashes, they were a flood. He was the soldier on the barricade, his rifle spitting defiance. He was the mother, her love a supernova against the encroaching dark. He was Silas, his mentor, standing in a chamber just like this one, laughing as the resonance finally washed away the last of his sanity and replaced it with a terrible, divine purpose. The final blast door buckled inward with a shriek of tortured metal. 3 ethel curators glided into the chamber, their staffs glowing. They moved in perfect, synchronized formation, an embodiment of passionless order. Ilara screamed at Kyle to fight the connection, to hold on to himself, but it was too late. He wasn't just Kyle anymore. He was a vessel for every soldier who ever drew a last breath, every revolutionary who ever screamed for freedom, every soul that ever chose to burn rather than fade. He felt their collective will surge through him, a tidal wave of pure, uncut human spirit. He saw the curators raise their staffs, ready to deliver their silent, placid oblivion. But instead of fear, he felt an overwhelming, transcendent rage. He opened his mouth, and it wasn't a scavenger's terrified cry that emerged. It was a scream born from the heart of a dying star, a sound woven from a billion final goodbyes and a billion promises of vengeance. It was the sound of humanity's ghost. The sonic and psychic force of the cry hit the curators like a physical blow. Their crystalline staffs shattered, the air crackled, and the lights in the Undercroft exploded in a shower of sparks. But the true effect was on the silence tower miles away. Its placid, nullifying hum stuttered, warped, and then inverted. For a single, horrifying moment, the tower didn't dampen emotion. It amplified it, broadcasting the raw, undiluted agony of the city's final moments across its entire network. The three curators froze. Their fluid, graceful forms seized up. A shudder ran through the first one, its silver armor cracking like porcelain through a fissure in its faceplate. Kyle saw not a monster, but something pale and trembling. Its large, black eye, wide with a primal, alien terror. It was feeling, for the first time, the full weight of the grief it had been sent to erase. And the sensation was annihilating it. Seizing the moment, Kyle grabbed Ilara and plunged into a darkened maintenance tunnel, the screams of the Ithel thin, reedy, and utterly alien echoing behind them. He ran deeper into the black, the slate against his chest no longer humming, but singing a triumphant, terrible song of remembrance. He had gone looking for a single ghost and had awoken them all. The fever wasn't madness. It was an inheritance. And the long, quiet night of Earth was finally over. The tunnels were a labyrinth of cold, dripping darkness, a place where the only sound was their ragged breathing and the frantic drumming of Kyle's heart. He was no longer just running from the Ethel. He was running from the cacophony in his own skull. The slate, tucked against his chest, was a psychic lodestone, pulling the city's agony into him. He saw the world through a fractured lens. The grimy tunnel walls overlaid with the ghostly afterimages of families huddling during the final bombardments. Their terror a cold weight in his stomach. Ilara guided them with a steady hand. Her knowledge of the Undersutter's secret ways, the only thing keeping them ahead of their pursuers. She didn't speak, conserving her breath, but her grip on his arm was a constant, grounding pressure against the storm of borrowed memories. They emerged hours later through a rusted sewer grate into a world of mist and muted colors. This was the drowned city, the old waterfront district that had been surrendered to the rising tides decades before the Ethel arrived. The skeletal frames of buildings rose from the murky, placid water like ancient leviathans, connected by a treacherous web of collapsed skyways and makeshift bridges. The air here was different, thick with the scent of salt and decay. And blessedly, the Silence Tower's hum was weaker, muffled by the water and the sheer distance. They found refuge in the belfry of a half-submerged cathedral, a pocket of dry, stale air high above the waterline. While Ilara worked to set up a small, battery-powered signal jammer, Kale slumped against the cold stone, finally allowing the full force of the resonance to wash over him. His head was a crowded room. He felt the phantom ache of 100 different fatal wounds, the lingering warmth of 1,000 last embraces. He could taste the synthetic coffee a dock worker had been drinking the moment the Ethel ships eclipsed the sun. He knew the favorite lullaby of a child who had perished in a firestorm 3 blocks from where he now sat. The slate lay on the floor between them, its soft light pulsing in time with his racing heart. "It is a Mnemosyne Codex," Ilara said, her voice cutting through the noise in his head. "One of the last. Not a weapon, Kyle, a library. It was designed to preserve the core of human experience, our emotional essence, in the face of an existential threat. Our ancestors feared a cataclysm that would wipe out our culture, not a silence that would steal our souls." She knelt beside him, her weathered face grim. "The Ethel didn't find it because its energy signature is purely psychic. It was dormant, waiting for a compatible mind, a resonator, to awaken it. It waited for someone with a deep enough wound, A quiet enough life to hear its whisper. Kyle looked at his trembling hands. It's too much. I can't separate their feelings from my own. I'm dissolving. He thought of the name he'd come to Seraphim Dynamics to find, the face he'd needed to see. Now, that personal grief was a single drop of rain in a raging ocean. That is the danger, Ilara affirmed. The Codex offers a power we never knew we had, the collective emotional force of our entire species. It is the perfect weapon against the Ethel, but it burns its fuel. It will consume you. Kyle, wear your soul down until you are nothing but an echo, a ghost puppeteering a body. You must learn to be the conductor of the choir, not just another voice within it. You must find your own silence within its storm. They rested for a day, Ilara coaching him through breathing exercises, meditative techniques designed to help him find the core of himself amidst the psychic hurricane. He learned to build small walls in his mind, to recognize the foreign emotions and observe them without being drowned by them. It was like trying to stand firm on a beach as a tsunami crashed ashore. He could feel the Ethel's response to his outburst. It was not the frantic scramble of a panicked army, but the cold, deliberate focus of a surgeon identifying a new infection. The silence network was recalibrating, strengthening, but there were now dead spots, pockets where the null field had been permanently damaged. In those zones, the city was waking up. They saw it when they ventured out for supplies, moving across a precarious skyway. Below, in a small Ursel, trash-strewn plaza that was now one of the dead zones. A small crowd of people had gathered. These were the quiet ones, the survivors who had fully succumbed to the Ethel's psychic anesthetic. But they weren't quiet anymore. They stood blinking in the gray light, looking at their own hands, at each other, with a terrifying, childlike confusion. A woman began to weep, deep, shuddering sobs of a grief she didn't understand. A man stared at the sky, his face contorted in a mask of pure, uncomprehending rage. They were feeling years of suppressed emotion flooding back all at once, without context or control. Kale felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost buckled his knees. He had shattered their peace, their only shield against a world of pain. A different kind of Ethel patrol moved through the plaza. Not the silver curators, but smaller, insectoid drones called weavers. They didn't erase. They emitted a soft, chiming frequency that gently guided the confused citizens back toward the nearest active silence tower, like shepherds calming a panicked flock. The Ethel weren't just erasing humanity. They were curating it, managing it, treating its soul like a disease to be contained. But something else was moving through the city. Something that was not a shepherd. While they watched, a new figure entered the plaza. It was shaped like a curator, but its armor was the color of smoked chrome, matte and light absorbent. It didn't flow. It moved with a predatory stillness, each step deliberate. In its hands, it held not a staff, but two thin, crystalline rods that it used to probe the air, the ground, the very psychic residue of the place. Ilara pulled Kyle back into the shadows. "An auditor," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "I've only heard stories. They are not surgeons. Kale, they are inquisitors. They don't silence emotion. They hunt it, trace it to its source, and vivisect it. It's looking for you." The auditor paused, its featureless faceplate turning slowly, scanning the ruins. Kale felt a cold, clinical pressure against his mind, like a scalpel searching for a nerve. He instinctively drew on the codex, not with a scream, but with a whisper, pulling a veil of psychic static around them, a cloak woven from the ambient sorrow of the drowned city. The pressure receded. The auditor turned and continued its slow, methodical sweep of the plaza. They were safe for the moment, but they were being hunted by something far more dangerous than a simple soldier. As they retreated back toward the cathedral, another presence made itself known. A figure detached itself from the shadows of a nearby building, followed by two more. They wore the patched, hard-worn gear of the Hollow Men, their faces obscured by scavenger masks and goggles. The lead figure raised a hand, not in aggression, but in a clear signal to halt. He was broad-shouldered and carried an old-world kinetic rifle, a relic that the Ethel's energy shields were not designed to counter. "That was quite a light show you put on at the Undercroft," the man said, his voice a gravelly baritone, amplified by his mask. "My name is Yorick, and my people would very much like to know how you made the gods scream." Kale and Ilara exchanged a look. The Hollow Men were legends, the last organized human resistance on the continent. They were ruthless, pragmatic, and utterly dedicated to the war. They were also known for seeing everything and everyone as a potential weapon. "We're just scavengers," Kyle said, his hand hovering near his pistol. Yorick let out a short, humorless laugh. "Scavengers don't make the silence towers flicker. Scavengers don't get auditors sent after them. We've been monitoring the network for years. Nothing has ever made a dent. Until you." He took a step closer, his eyes fixed on the faint glow of the codex through Kale's jacket. "We want what you have. We want to know how to use it. Earth is dying. Scavenger. We don't have time for secrets. It is not a weapon you can simply wield," Ilara interjected, stepping in front of Kale. "It is a force that will burn the user to cinders." "Then let him burn," Yorick replied, his voice cold, "as long as he takes the Ethel with him." Suddenly, Kale's head snapped up. The clinical probing of the auditor was back, but it was no longer a distant search. It was a sharp, focused beam, and it was locked onto their position. Yorick's emotional outburst, his focused, aggressive intent, had acted like a flare in the psychic darkness. "It's here," Kyle breathed. The auditor appeared on the skyway behind Yorick's team with impossible speed and silence. It had traded its probing rods for a single, long filament of black crystal that seemed to drink the light around it. One of Yorick's men turned, raising his rifle, but he never fired. The auditor made a minute gesture with the filament, and the soldier simply stopped. His eyes went wide, not in pain, but in sheer cognitive overload. He saw a universe of suffering in a single second, the heat death of stars, the collapse of galaxies, the grief of every sentient being that had ever lived, all focused into a single point in his mind. He crumpled to the ground, a thin trickle of blood seeping from his ears, his brain effectively boiled by pure, weaponized despair. Yorick and his remaining soldier opened fire, their kinetic slugs sparking uselessly against a shimmering distortion field around the auditor. The Ethel Inquisitor ignored them, its attention fixed solely on Kyle. It recognized the source. Kyle felt its mind touch his, and it wasn't a violent assault. It was an impossibly precise and curious intrusion. a desire to understand, to categorize, to deconstruct the symphony of rage and sorrow it was sensing. Ilara was screaming his name. Yorick was shouting orders, but their voices were distant. He was locked in a silent battle with the Auditor, his own chaotic choir of human feeling pushing back against the Ethel's cold, analytical dread. He had to break its focus. Reaching into the codex, he didn't grasp for rage or grief. He searched for something more complex, more human. He found it a memory of pure, irrational hope, the unwavering belief of a scientist working on a cure for an incurable disease, the blind faith of a lover waiting for a soldier to return from an impossible war. He focused all of it, a brilliant, illogical, beautiful spike of pure hope, and thrust it at the Auditor. For the Ethel, an entity that existed in a universe of cold, hard calculus. The concept was utterly alien. The Auditor recoiled, its distortion field flickering violently. The psychic feedback was deafening. Yorick, seeing his chance, tackled Kale, pulling him behind the rusted shell of a transport vehicle as the Auditor staggered back, momentarily disoriented by the psychic anomaly. "We need to go! Now!" Yorick yelled, dragging him toward the edge of the skyway. Below, the dark water churned. They were trapped. The Auditor recovering in front of them, the vast, open water behind them, and the Hollow Men deciding in a split second that Kale was too valuable to lose and too dangerous to leave. The fight for humanity's soul had just found its battlefield, and Kale was the territory being contested. Jump Yorick's voice was a raw command, leaving no room for argument. He shoved Kale toward the mangled edge of the skyway, where twisted rebar jutted out like broken teeth over a 50-foot drop to the inky water below. Behind them, the Auditor had recovered, its form shimmering with a renewed, menacing focus. Its black filament weapon was already tracing patterns in the air, weaving a net of pure psychic dread. Kyle's feet left the steel, and for a heart-stopping second, he was suspended between the gray sky and the black water, a nexus of a war he had never asked for. The impact was a brutal, icy shock that stole the air from his lungs. The weight of his gear and the precious codex dragged him down into the cold, silent depths. Panic flared, a primal, weird animal terror that was entirely his own, a welcome anchor in the storm of borrowed emotions. He kicked frantically, his muscles screaming in the cold, fighting his way back toward a surface that seemed miles away. Yorick and his last remaining soldier, a grim-faced woman with a shock of white hair named Lena, broke the surface beside him, gasping. They were strong swimmers, moving with an economy of motion that spoke of hard training. Kyle, a child of the concrete canyons, struggled to keep his head above water. The half-submerged buildings around them now seemed less like ruins and more like the gravestones of a forgotten race of giants. The Auditor stood at the edge of the broken skyway, a silent silhouette against the bruised sky. It did not pursue, it simply watched, its featureless faceplate tracking their slow progress. Kyle felt its mind again, not attacking, but observing, cataloging his response to the cold, the fear, the desperation. It was learning. "It's letting us go," Lena said, her teeth chattering. "No." Yorick grunted, swimming toward the barnacle-encrusted pylon of a collapsed bridge. "It's not a hound. It's a scientist. It's watching the specimen react to a new stimulus." They found a precarious handhold on the pylon and hauled themselves out of the water, shivering uncontrollably. They were exposed, vulnerable, and miles from any known Hollow Man outpost. Yorick produced a small waterproof pack, withdrawing a thermal blanket and a nutrient bar, which he split 3 ways. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the lapping of the water and their own chattering teeth. "The auditor will report your signature," Yorick said finally, his gaze fixed on Kyle. "The Ethel will retask every asset in this sector to find you. The Weavers, the Spectres, more Curators. They will methodically dismantle this entire city block by block to root you out. You're no longer a scavenger, kid. You're the most wanted man on the planet." "What is that thing?" Kale asked, gesturing back toward the Skyway with a numb hand. "The Codex." Yorick's eyes narrowed. "Where did you find it?" Kale recounted the story, the search for a ghost in his own past, the discovery in the Seraphim archives, the awakening. He explained what Ilara had told him, that it was a library, not a weapon. "Every library is an armory if you know how to read," Lena countered, her voice low and intense. She had a network of fine scars around her eyes, the mark of someone who had spent a lifetime staring into the sun or the face of an explosion. "We've been fighting them with bullets and bombs, trying to punch holes in gods. We've been fighting their technology. But you heard it. You attacked its mind. That's the war we need to be fighting. It will kill him." A voice rasped from the shadows beneath the bridge. Ilara emerged, soaked and shivering, but alive. She had found a different way down, a maintenance ladder Kale hadn't seen. The Codex draws on his own emotional energy as a catalyst. The more he uses it, the more of himself he pours into it. He will become a husk. Yorick turned to her, his face unreadable. Better a burning husk that takes down a silence tower than a live man hiding in the dark. We have a place, a sanctuary, hidden from them. We can teach him, help him control it. We can turn your library into a cannon. Kyle looked from Yorick's hard-bitten pragmatism to Ilara's desperate plea to preserve his soul. He felt the Codex against his skin, a faint, warm pulse. It was silent now, as if waiting for his decision. The choir of the dead had receded, leaving behind a profound emptiness. He thought of the weeping woman in the plaza, of the terror in the curator's eye, of the Ethel's cold, clinical curiosity. He was a key, a catalyst, a freak of psychic nature. Hiding was no longer an option. The hunt was on, and if he was the prey, he would make sure the hunters bled for it. "Where is this sanctuary?" Cole asked, his voice steady for the first time. The journey took 2 days, a grueling trek through the decaying veins of the city. They moved through submerged subway tunnels, navigated the treacherous high-wire act of collapsed power lines, and slipped through Ethel patrols that were now terrifyingly frequent. The auditor was gone, but its presence had left a psychic stain on the city. The Weavers were more aggressive, their shepherding chimes now carrying a subtle, discordant note of command. The Spectre drones flew in tighter, more intricate patterns, their optical sensors glowing with a new intensity. The city was a tightening net. Kale learned to use the Codex defensively, not as a shout, but as a shroud. Guided by Ilara, he projected a bubble of emotional white noise around their group, a camouflage of psychic static woven from the ambient despair of the ruins. It was exhausting work, leaving him dizzy and nauseous, his own memories and feelings becoming frayed at the edges. He saw Yorick and Lena in a new light. They were the last of a dying breed, Soldiers fighting a war of attrition, they knew they could not win. They moved with a grim purpose, their every action honed by years of loss. Lena taught him how to read the patterns of the drone patrols, how to listen for the faint, subharmonic hum of a nearby curator. Yorick showed him how to fight with a knife, how to kill silently and efficiently, telling him, "The Codex is your cannon, but you'll still need a dagger for when they get close." Their sanctuary was called the Core. It was a pre-war deep-earth geothermal plant, buried a mile beneath the foundations of the city. Its existence had been wiped from every record, its entrance a series of ridiculously complex mechanical puzzles hidden within the husk of an old municipal incinerator. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of filtered air and hot metal. The Core was a small, self-sustaining city, home to the last 100 or so hollow men. It was a place of stark functionality, hydroponic bays, workshops filled with salvaged tech, and a central command center built around the geothermal turbine itself. It was a testament to human ingenuity and stubbornness. Their leader was a man named Valerius, a former strategist for the Terran Alliance military. He was older than Ilara, with a body kept wiry and hard by a lifetime of discipline, and eyes that held the unnerving stillness of a man who had made too many impossible decisions. He listened to Yorick's report in the command center, his gaze never leaving Kyle. The Codex, now removed from Kyle's jacket, sat on the central tactical table, its soft light seeming to mock the harsh fluorescent glow of the room. "A psychic amplifier," Valerius said, his voice a low rumble. "We always theorized they existed. Project Chimera, the attempt to weaponize human emotion. We thought it was a failure." He looked at Kale. "They told us the test subjects all went insane or died from cerebral hemorrhaging." "The boy is strong," Ilara said, her tone protective. "But he needs guidance. Not a drill sergeant. He needs both." Valerius corrected her gently. "The Ethel are an army of perfect discipline. To fight them, we must match their focus. Your grief, your rage," he said, his eyes locking with Kyle's, "are now ammunition. But ammunition is useless without a rifle, and a rifle is useless without a marksman. We will make you a marksman." The training was brutal. It was a war on two fronts. By day, Yorick and Lena pushed his body to its limits, drilling him in combat, stealth, and survival until his muscles screamed and his bones ached. By night, Valerius and Ilara guided him through the treacherous landscape of his own mind. He learned to dive into the Codex, to navigate the sea of memories not as a victim, but as an explorer. He learned to isolate specific emotional frequencies, the cold, sharp edge of a sniper's focus, the unyielding resolve of a doomed honor guard, the explosive fury of a mother defending her nest. He practiced shaping these feelings into psychic constructs, a shield of pure sorrow, a blade of focused rage, a disorienting burst of chaotic joy. But with every plunge into the Codex, he lost a little more of himself. The name he had been searching for in the Seraphim archives was now a faint whisper, the face a blur. His own memories felt thin, like faded photographs compared to the vibrant, terrifying clarity of the billion dead souls he communed with. He was becoming the library, his personality the Dewey Decimal System used to categorize the pain of others. A week into his training, a scout returned to the Core, barely alive, her mind shattered. She had been observing the main silence tower in the city's central plaza. The Ethel were modifying it. They were wrapping its base in strange, crystalline conduits, running black, fibrous cables from it to a network of smaller and auxiliary pylons. They're not just reinforcing it, Valerius concluded, studying the scout's fragmented data. They're turning it into a transmitter of a different kind. They're preparing to invert the field again, but this time under their control. They're going to broadcast a wave of pure, concentrated despair, a psychic poison. They won't just silence the city. They will break its will to live permanently. The scout's last coherent thought before she lapsed into a coma was a single, chilling image: the auditor, standing at the base of the tower, its black filament gently touching the new crystalline structure, tuning it like a vast, terrible instrument. The Ethel had learned from his scream. Now, they were building their own. "How long do we have?" Jorik asked. "Days. A week at most," Valerius answered. "We have to destroy that tower before it comes online." All eyes in the command center turned to Kale. He was their only chance, their psychic cannon. He felt the weight of their hope, their desperation, and it was a heavier burden than all the ghosts in the Codex combined. He was no longer a scavenger looking for a memory. He was a weapon being aimed at the heart of the enemy, and he knew with a chilling certainty that when he was fired, the recoil would likely tear him apart. The plan was as simple as it was suicidal, a two-pronged assault codenamed Echo's Fall. Jorik would lead a diversionary team of Hollow Men, a loud and kinetic strike against the Ethel's primary energy conduit on the city's west side. Their goal was to draw the bulk of the Curator Inspector patrols away from the central plaza. Meanwhile, a smaller infiltration team, Kyle, Lena, and a quiet demolitions expert named Reese would navigate the sewer systems to surface directly beneath the modified silence tower. Kyle's job was to be the key, Lena the sword, and Reese the final, explosive punctuation. The night before the operation, the core was a hive of tense, focused activity. The air in the workshops hummed with the sound of grinding tools and the sharp crackle of plasma welders as the Hollow Men prepared their aging gear for what everyone knew was likely a final battle. There was no rousing speech from Valerius, no hollow promises of victory. There was only the grim, shared understanding of a people who had lived on the brink for so long that the abyss felt like home. Kale found Ilara in a small and quiet meditation chamber, the walls lined with shelves of pre-war books, their paper pages a fragile, defiant luxury. She was holding a small, smooth river stone in her palm. "This is all I have left of my home," she said, her voice soft. "Before the city, before the Ethel. My son gave it to me. I hold it to remember the feeling of his small hand in mine, to remember my own grief, distinct from all the others." She pressed the stone into Kyle's hand. It was cool and solid. "The Codex will demand everything from you tomorrow, Kyle. It will offer you the strength of 1,000,000,000 souls, but it will try to erase the one that is yours. You must have an anchor, something that belongs only to Kyle, the scavenger, not Kyle, the resonator. When the storm is at its worst, hold on to this. Remember the boy who was just looking for a name in a forgotten archive. Do not let him die before your body does." He closed his hand around the stone, the simple, physical sensation, a stark contrast to the ethereal chaos in his mind. He finally understood. To control the ocean, he couldn't become the ocean. He had to be the shore. The assault began just before the false dawn, the perpetual gray of the sky, lightening by a barely perceptible shade. Yorick's team erupted from the ruins in the west with a symphony of violence. Explosions blossomed against the skyline, the distinct percussive roar of kinetic weapons echoing through the dead city. On the tactical display in Valerius's command center, they watched as red icons representing Ethel patrols swarmed toward the disturbance. The diversion was working. "Go," Valerius said, his voice a low command. "May you be the echo that brings the silence down." The sewers were a stinking, claustrophobic nightmare. Reese led the way, his movements quick and silent, his hand seeming to know every rusted valve and crumbling wall by touch alone. Lena followed, her pulse rifle held at a low ready, her eyes constantly scanning the oppressive darkness. Kyle brought up the rear, the Riverstone a cold weight in his pocket, his mind a battlefield of preparation. He was not just walking, he was listening with a sense beyond hearing. He could feel the city above them, a vast interconnected web of psychic energy. He felt the distant, angry spike of Jorik's assault, the cold, orderly flow of the Ethel's response, and, at the center of it all, a growing, terrible hum, the Silence Tower, powering up. It felt like a vast, psychic whirlpool, pulling the ambient despair of the city into itself, concentrating it, preparing to unleash it. As they neared the plaza, the psychic pressure intensified. Kyle's head throbbed, and phantom whispers slithered at the edges of his consciousness, the tower's nascent broadcast, a siren song of hopelessness. "It's already over. You've already lost. Surrender. Find peace in the quiet." "Kale, stay with us." Lena's voice cut through the fog. He looked up to see her face inches from his, her scarred eyes filled with a fierce concern. "Don't listen to it. It's a lie." He nodded, gripping the stone in his pocket. "My name is Kale. I came to find a memory. My own." The simple mantra was a shield. They surfaced through a maintenance hatch into the cavernous, echoing space of a derelict subway station directly beneath the plaza. The air here was vibrating, the low hum of the tower a physical force that rattled his teeth. In the center of the station, directly below the tower's core, stood a single, obsidian pylon, a grounding conduit, pulsing with a sickening black light. Guarding it were not curators, but something new. They were Ethel, but they were different. Their forms less fluid and more crystalline. Their armor faceted like onyx. They stood perfectly still, like statues. But Kale could feel their minds cold, sharp, and utterly silent. They were psychic black holes, designed to absorb and nullify any emotional outburst. They were sentinels, the ultimate defense against a weapon like him. And standing among them was the Auditor. It held its black filament, which now glowed with a faint, internal violet light. It turned its head as they emerged from the hatch, not in surprise, but in acknowledgement. It had been waiting for them. "Reese, the conduit," Lena ordered, her voice a tight whisper. "Kyle and I will buy you time." The battle that followed was not one of sound and fury, but of silence and will. Lena opened fire, her rifle's roar deafening in the enclosed space. The kinetic slugs, which would have torn through a curator's shield, impacted the sentinels and simply stopped. They were caught in a localized stasis field, inches from the crystalline armor, before dropping harmlessly to the floor. The Auditor ignored her completely. Its focus was a tangible beam of pressure directed solely at Kale. It did not project despair or terror. It projected nothing. A perfect, absolute void. It was an attempt to psychologically smother him, to show him the ultimate truth of the ethel's philosophy that in the end, all feeling, all existence, decays into a final, meaningless silence. It was the most profound attack he had ever faced. Rage, grief, hope they were all useless against a foe who presented you with the utter futility of your own existence. The choir of 1 billion souls in his head went quiet, silenced not by a psychic scream, but by a perfect, unanswerable question. Why bother? He felt his will to fight, his very sense of self, beginning to dissolve into the auditor's abyss. He saw his life, his struggle, the entire human experience, as a brief, pointless flicker in an eternity of cold, empty space. He was falling. Then, his fingers brushed the stone in his pocket. My name is Kyle. I came to find a memory. He clung to that thought, that simple, selfish, human desire. It wasn't a grand purpose. It wasn't about saving the world. It was about one man's refusal to forget. It was small. It was insignificant. And in the face of the auditor's perfect void, its insignificance was its greatest strength. The void was designed to swallow galaxies of feeling. It wasn't prepared for a single, stubborn grain of sand. He didn't push back with an emotional tidal wave. He focused on that one. Small, personal piece of his own history. The grief for a person whose name he couldn't even remember, and held it up like a tiny candle in an infinite darkness. The auditor faltered. The focused pressure of its void wavered. A flicker of what felt like confusion. In its perfect, orderly calculus of existence, a being who fought for a memory he no longer possessed was a logical impossibility. It was an error in the cosmic equation. That flicker was all Lena needed. The Sentinels, their concentration tied to the auditors, also wavered for a microsecond. Lena wasn't aiming at them anymore. She fired past them, her slugs ricocheting off the far wall at a precisely calculated angle, striking the obsidian conduit from behind, where its shielding was weakest. The conduit cracked, spitting arcs of violet energy. Reese, who had been crawling along the ceiling pipes like a spider, dropped onto it, slapping a series of magnetic charges onto its fractured surface. Fire in the hole, he screamed, diving for cover. The auditor finally turned its attention from Kale, realizing the true physical threat. It moved with blinding speed, its black filament whipping toward Reese. But Kale was ready. He opened the floodgates of the codex. But he didn't project an emotion at the auditor. He wrapped it around it. He took the collective, suffocating grief of every parent who ever lost a child, the white-hot agony of every soldier who watched a friend die, and he didn't use it as a weapon. He used it as a blanket. He showed the auditor what it was to be human, to be drowning in a sea of feeling you could not control. He forced it to share the burden. The Ethel Inquisitor froze, its filament inches from Reese. For the first time, it was not projecting an emotion, it was experiencing one, and it was breaking. Its crystalline form began to fracture, hairline cracks spreading across its onyx armor, leaking not blood, but pure light. Reese's charges blew. The explosion was not a boom, but a deep, resonant thump that shook the entire station. The obsidian conduit shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. Above them, the deafening hum of the silence tower died with a final agonizing groan. Like a dying beast, a wave of pure psychic energy washed down from above the concentrated despair the tower had been about to unleash, now released without direction or focus. It was a wave of pure, unfiltered human misery, and it washed over everyone in the station. Reese and Lena screamed, dropping to their knees, clutching their heads. Kyle felt it hit him, and it was worse than anything the auditor could have conceived. But he was ready. He wasn't the shore anymore. He was the entire goddamn ocean. He opened his mind completely, accepting the wave, letting the grief, the pain, the hopelessness of 1,000 generations flow into him. He absorbed it, channeled it, and using the last of his strength, he focused it into one single, coherent thought and hurled it back up through the ruined conduit at the dying tower above. We remember the tower, its systems already critical, overloaded. They heard a series of deep, structural groans from the plaza above, followed by the monumental shriek of collapsing metal. The silence tower, the symbol of the Ethel's quiet tyranny, was coming down. As the dust and debris rained down into the station, Kale collapsed, the world fading to black. The last thing he felt was the small, cool weight of the riverstone in his hand. The last thing he heard was not the choir of the dead, but a single, faint whisper in his own memory. A woman's voice, finally giving him the name he had been searching for. Kyle awoke to the sound of a city screaming. It was not the unified, psychic shriek of the tower's fall, but 1,000,000 individual voices, a discordant and terrifying orchestra of newfound pain. He was lying on a makeshift cot in the Corps' medbay. The low, steady thrum of the geothermal turbine, a comforting presence beneath the floor. Lena was sitting in a chair beside him, cleaning her rifle, her movements slow and deliberate. There were new lines of exhaustion around her eyes, but the grim set of her jaw was gone, replaced by a deep, profound weariness. "Welcome back, Cannon," she said, not looking up. "You missed the after-party." He sat up, his body aching as if he'd been trampled. But his mind was quiet. The constant, roaring choir of the codex was gone. In its place was a stillness he hadn't felt since before he'd entered the Seraphim building. He could still feel the emotional texture of the world around him, Lena's weary resolve, the anxious energy of the hollow man outside. The vast, chaotic sea of emotion from the city above, but it was no longer inside his head. It was a landscape he could observe without being consumed by it. He had become the shore. "Maya," he whispered. The name felt solid, real. Her name was Maya. "My sister." He looked at Lena, the memory finally clear, no longer a phantom, but a sharp, painful photograph in his mind. The reason he'd gone to the archives was to find her medical file, to confirm the rare genetic marker they shared. A foolish, desperate hope that it might explain his own strange sensitivity to the city's psychic echoes. It was a search for an answer that no longer mattered. "Good," Lena said, finally meeting his gaze. "Hold on to that. You're going to need it." They learned what had happened from Valerius in the command center. Yorick's team had made it back, battered and bloodied, with 1/3 of their number lost. The fall of the tower had sent a shockwave through the Ethel network. Patrols had ceased. The Spectre drones had dropped from the sky like stones. The Weavers had gone inert. For the first time in years, the city of Seattle was free of its silent wardens. But it was not a victory. Drone footage displayed on the main screen showed a city in the throes of a violent, chaotic awakening. A lifetime of suppressed emotion was erupting without context or control. People wandered the streets, weeping, laughing hysterically, or staring into space, catatonic with the sheer sensory overload. Fights broke out over nothing, fueled by decades of buried resentment. Small pockets of community were forming, huddling together for comfort, while others had devolved into feral packs. They hadn't liberated the city. They had uncapped a volcano of human trauma. We broke their control, Yorick said, his arm in a sling, his face a mask of frustration. But what did we leave them with? Chaos. They're tearing each other apart. They are like children learning to feel again. Ilara corrected him softly. She had been tending to the wounded, both physical and psychic. They need guidance. They need patience. They need hope. But hope was a commodity in short supply. A day after the tower fell, a new phenomenon began, a complete and utter ethel withdrawal. Their ships, which had hung in the upper atmosphere like permanent constellations, vanished. The inert drones and armor of fallen curators on the streets dissolved into a fine, silver dust that was carried away on the wind. It was not a retreat. It was an erasure of their own presence, a meticulous cleaning of the board. "They've abandoned the project," Valerius stated, his voice grim as he analyzed the data. "They've deemed the Earth experiment a failure. A contaminated sample." A chilling realization settled over the command center. The Ethel were not conquerors. They were curators. They did not tolerate failure or infection. They sterilized it. The confirmation came a week later. From a deep space listening post the Hollow Men had managed to keep hidden in the Kuiper Belt. A massive energy signature was building at the edge of the solar system. An Ethel fleet, larger than anything they had ever seen, was assembling. They weren't preparing for an invasion. The energy readings were consistent with a single, terrifying pre-war theory: stellar cautery. They were building a weapon that could focus the energy of a star, a blade of pure fusion capable of scouring a planet's surface clean, leaving nothing behind but a sterile glass sphere. They were not going to silence humanity anymore. They were going to delete it. Despair, thick and suffocating, settled over the core. They had fought for so long, only to trade a slow, quiet death for a quick, fiery one. Yorick began arming every last man and woman for a final, pointless stand. Valerius, the master strategist, stood before his tactical maps, utterly defeated. There was no strategy against the dawn. Kyle walked through the tense, quiet corridors of their sanctuary, the river stone in his hand. He felt their fear, their resignation, their last sparks of defiance. He still held the connection to the Codex. It was part of him now, a scar on his soul, but he controlled it. The library was no longer his master. He was the librarian, and he realized that in all their fighting, in all their rage, they had been using the library all wrong. You don't beat an idea by screaming at it. You beat it by offering a better one. He found Valerius and Ilara by the geothermal turbine, the humming heart of their world. "There's one last thing we can do," Kale said, his voice quiet but clear. "Not a weapon, a message." The plan was insane, born of desperation and a glimmer of the irrational hope he had once used against the Auditor. They were going to turn their entire sanctuary into a broadcast antenna. Using the geothermal tap as a power source, they would route the energy through every system in the core, modulating it, turning the whole facility into a colossal psychic amplifier. And at its center, Kyle would be the voice. He stood on a platform directly over the roaring turbine, cables connecting him to the core's central command. Lena and Yorick stood nearby, their weapons lowered, their faces etched with a fragile trust. Elara placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember your anchor." "Kyle," she whispered. He closed his eyes and reached into the library. He bypassed the rage, the grief, the defiance, the loud, simple emotions of war. He searched for the quiet, complex, and contradictory truths. He pulled forth the memory of a father teaching his daughter to ride a bicycle, the swell of pride mixed with the fear of her falling. He found the quiet courage of a doctor sitting with a dying patient, sharing a moment of profound, helpless empathy. He found the bittersweet ache of nostalgia, the fierce loyalty of a soldier for his squad, the irrational joy of music, the profound peace of watching a sunrise. And then he reached for his own story. He took the grief for his sister, Maya. No longer just a wound, but a testament to the love that had created it. He took the memory of Elara's gentle guidance, of Jorik's gruff protection, of Lena's sharp-eyed faith. He gathered the entire messy, broken, beautiful tapestry of human experience, the quiet moments, the unspoken kindnesses, the foolish hopes, the enduring love. He wove it all together into a single, complex signal. It was not a shout of defiance. It was not a plea for mercy. It was a statement of fact. It was the answer to the Ethel's perfect, silent void. He opened his mouth and let it pour out of him, a silent song broadcast from the heart of the earth, amplified by the planet's own energy. A message that said, "This is what we are. Our chaos is our meaning. Our pain is the price of our love. Our silence is not empty. It is filled with memory. And we would rather burn with all of it than live in the perfect, quiet nothing you offer." The broadcast pulsed outward, a wave of pure, unfiltered humanity, traveling at the speed of thought, out past the atmosphere, past the moon, toward the silent, waiting fleet. On the tactical display, the energy signature of the Ethel weapon continued to build, reaching its final, critical peak. The hollow men watched, their faces illuminated by the screen. Their fight over, they had said their piece. Then, the unthinkable happened. The energy signature wavered. It held at its peak for a long, agonizing minute, and then, slowly, impossibly, it began to recede. The fleet did not attack. It did not respond. It simply paused. The war was not over. The Ethel were still there, silent and vast at the edge of their world, faced with a logical paradox they could not resolve. The infection they had come to cure was also the only thing that gave the patient meaning. Their crusade of silence had been met with a truth too complex to simply erase. Kyle collapsed to his knees. The connection severed, leaving him blessedly, wonderfully empty. He was just Kyle again. He was tired, and he was grieving, but he was himself. The sun rose over the ruins of Seattle. For the first time in years, it was not just a change in the light, but a promise. The sky was clear. Kyle stood with Elara at the entrance to the core, feeling the cool morning air on his face. Below, in the waking city, the first tentative steps toward healing had begun. The screaming had softened, in some places, to weeping, in others, to talking. The long, difficult work of remembering how to be human had started. The Leviathan was not slain, but it had been taught to listen, and in the profound, uncertain silence, humanity began to find its own voice once more.